In this video, we will be discussing the chapter that is called as the fundamental unit of life from the class 9, right? Okay. Now, when we talk about the fundamental unit of life, what is life? What is a living organism? We know that the organisms which carry out different types of life processes like the respiration process, breathing process, or the digestion process, or the reproduction process, or excretion, all these functions, the organisms who can carry out, they all are called as the living organisms. Now, how these living organisms are sustaining their life? Because these particular organisms, whether their body is complex or their body is very simple, even in that condition also, they are made up of a particular structure in their body that is called as the unit of life. That means this particular structure in their body can perform different functions to sustain the life of the particular organism. And that is the reason the tiny structure in the living organism's body is called as the fundamental unit of life. That means this is the basis of life. Because of this tiny structure, the total life of the organism is sustained. Now, what is that tiny structure in all the living organisms' body called? The tiny structure is called as the cell, right? So, in this chapter, we will be covering all different aspects of the fundamental unit of life that is called as cell. Every living organism, whether it is a simple organism or a very complex organism, they all are made up of this tiny structure, right? So this tiny fundamental unit of life is present in all living organisms, and they carry out the processes, the particular systems are there, or the different types of activities are there which will help the organism to sustain its life. Clear? Okay. Now we will just have a simple introductory part for the cell. Who discovered this particular tiny structure and what are the different parts of a cell? Cell, actually, it was discovered by Robert Hooke in 1664, right? Robert Hooke in 1664, when he was working on some project or in his lab, during that time he was having a cork with him. When he took a slice of cork and he just saw that cork under a very primitive, simple type of microscope, he could see box-like structures inside the cork, right? Okay. Now, he termed these structures as cell because they were looking like cabins. They were looking like rooms inside the cork. So, a single small tiny room inside the cork, that he named as the cell structure. So, the tiny structure, what he saw under his primitive simple microscope, he termed it as the cell because it was looking like smaller hexagonal rooms or boxes which are arranged in a particular pattern in the cork. Clear? So that was the first discovery of the cell, or we can say the fundamental unit of life. Later, different other scientists, they also started working on it. By the time the microscope was also a little bit developed, and they could find out different other aspects related to cell. Leeuwenhoek, that a few years later, he found living organisms under his microscope, right? So he found living cells. Cork is a dead cell. Leeuwenhoek is the scientist who could find out living cells, and he could see under his microscope. So many people were there and they started the research on this fundamental unit of life, and they started finding out different parts of the cell also. Clear? Okay. Now let us see how the cells are formed and what are the different types of cells present. Clear? So cells are definitely, we cannot say the cells come from some outer world. Cells always come from pre-existing cells. So cells always come, or we can write arise from pre-existing cells. That means for a cell to be formed, definitely there should be another cell existing. Previously existing cell must be there for getting a new cell. So cells cannot come from some outer world, they have to come from a previously existing cell.